correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, folks. How's it going, Gamer Nation? Steve, you out there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So, we're back at it, and before we get into our topic of the day, we wanted to take a moment to highlight another podcast on the D20 Podcast Network, and this week we're going to talk about Tabletop Tales, which is a podcast you've actually already heard us talk about, but they just changed their name. They were formerly called What Comes After. Their primary campaign, if you will, is a really neat kind of alt history post-apocalyptic setting. It's really, really good. It's really fascinating. But they just announced that they're changing the name of their feed to Tabletop Tales, and they're expanding, and I believe their last 2 episodes have actually been some Star Wars actual play, and I believe they're going to do some other games as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I know you were listening to at least, I haven't checked out any of the new stuff, but the Genesis stuff was, like I said, the world is fascinating.
The world's fascinating. I haven't got a chance to break into their Star Wars stuff, but I'm excited to hear that. Anything that comes out of them is pretty awesome. It's quality. So, with that being said, what are we talking about today, Steve?
Well, we've had some people mention it on our Discord, and it's a genre of gaming that's been around for quite a bit, but it's not one that I've ever really played, and in our conversations you haven't either. We wanted to talk about some superheroes, especially with, Marvel being big right now, because what was it, Winter Soldier just released?
Yeah, that just released, and then Zack Snyder's Justice League just released, which I watched that 4-hour epic, and it was 4 hours in epic. So,
and WandaVision.
Yeah, WandaVision, which is great. So I think we have a guest to talk about that, though, because we could sit here and talk about movies, but RPGs, as far as that's concerned, I don't really have a lot of experience, and I don't think you do either.
No, I made a character for Heroes Unlimited back in about 1996 once, but I don't think I ever got to play him.
And yeah, I read the Sentinels of the Multiverse RPG, and that's about as far as I got.
Okay. Well, I reached out to someone who's been into games for years and years and is quite passionate about gaming in general. And he's also a podcaster, does a podcast called Shane Plays. So Shane Stacks is going to join us today. And you there, Shane?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much for the invitation. I was just leaping out of the phone booth to get ready to... I had to get back into my, I had to fly down and convert into my podcaster, my mild-mannered podcaster guys.
Aha.
So
no cape and spandex.
It's not showing right now unless it's accidentally tucking out of the back of my shorts. So yeah, I just saved a few cats and stopped a volcano. And luckily, there's no supervillain activity, so I was able to go ahead and make the podcast.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the invitation, so thank you.
I'm aware of a lot of games for superheroes. I had friends back in my college days that played the old TSR Marvel, and like I said, I was supposed to at one point play Heroes Unlimited, but it never got off the ground, and now there's just, so many games out there.
Wait a minute, you had a game that never got off the ground? What? You mean you had a group of friends that wanted to play a game and it never started? Despite best intentions? I've never heard of that in this hobby. No, obviously I'm joking. Yeah, there's the superhero RPG genre is actually pretty rich for it being a smaller slice of the hobby. And it also goes back almost to the beginning. So we'll talk a little bit about, I've got a list here that, kind of goes from the beginning up through now. And before I go into that list, I'm going to miss something, right? There's no way that we could talk about everything in, one quick podcast about an entire slice of, the hobby, all these superhero RPGs. So if I don't mention somebody's favorite superhero RPG, I humbly apologize. And drop me a line at shane@shaneplays.com or tweet me at shaneplays ShanePlays, and I will rectify that. Make sure if I discuss these again in the future that I make sure to mention that game. So, just real quick, a little bit. You mentioned that I'm into games. I've been playing role-playing games of some sort since the early 80s. And really my first love, although, I played D&D and I played this and I played that, Traveler was actually the first RPG I probably ever rolled dice on, even though I already knew about D&D. But my first love was a superhero RPG. And even though I play all kinds of RPGs across, the spectrum of possible genres, I still have a deep and abiding love for superhero RPGs. Plus, I'm a big comic book nerd. So, I've been a huge comic book nerd as long as I've been a role-playing game nerd, if not longer. You mentioned my podcast, Shane Plays Geek Talk. Two of the major pillars of my geekdom are role-playing games and comic books. And, I've played various superhero role-playing games over the years. And then, I've kept up with others. So I really appreciate you reaching out. I don't think that this portion of the hobby gets discussed as much as it could, given how many people love comic books and how many different games there are out there. So I think this is a wonderful, opportunity to highlight them. So you guys basically said you have no experience playing superhero RPGs, right?
Not much, no. Like I said, I was supposed to play at one point years ago a Heroes Unlimited game. A friend that lived across the hall from me in college was supposed to run it, but like I said, it never got off the ground in classic form.
Yeah, so I love the picture. It was like it's supposed to be superheroes and capes, but they could never quite get off the ground. So yeah, I love the unintentional irony there. And I know that I wanted to give a quick shout out. You mentioned Star Wars. You've been on a Star Wars kick lately. My personal favorite version of Star Wars RPG is West End Games. So I like the D20 version. I played a little bit of the new one, the newer one from Fantasy Flight Games. So I'm just curious, what's your favorite version?
I played the original version, the West End version. It was the very first game I ever played. I liked that. I did not play any of the D20 stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've got rather limited experience at this point with the Fantasy Flight system. I like the Fantasy Flight system in a lot of ways because it does cinematic action really well, which is what Star Wars is for. But West End allows for that too. You know what I mean? It's not quite as rigid as D20 is in my experience.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with. I prefer West End Games. In fact, I bought the. They released that re-release a couple of years ago where it was like a complete reproduction in a slipcase, and I was just tickled to have that, even though I had the other the books already. But no, I think West End's where it's at. D20 was fun. It was surprisingly a good fit, in my opinion.
Yeah,
because it used this vitality and hit points thing, which I'm not going to deconstruct here because it would take a while to go into. But I enjoyed both, so I was just kind of curious.
Yeah.
Which system you like the best?
Yeah, we've got, there's a bunch of people on the network. In fact, our network's flagship is a Star Wars gaming podcast called Order 66. And they started back in the Saga Edition days.
Yeah.
But they, there's a lot, they really, really love the new FFG system and the generic version Genesis, which is, there's a few minor rules differences between them, but they're essentially the same basic engine.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I've never played the Saga version or the Saga edition, so
yeah.
But I've played the other three. Okay. So are you ready to unleash on superhero RPGs?
Oh, we may as well. Does it actually start with the TSR Marvel, or was there something before that?
It does not. No, it goes back before then. And the superhero RPG genre one of the challenges that it has is how do you simulate all of these because you got your street level hero who's basically just a guy in a mask running around and beating on people. And then you got Superman or Galactus or the Silver Surfer who are like off the charts powerful. And how do you come up with a system that allows all of that to be on the same map? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and that's one thing that superhero RPGs have kind of struggled with over the years with greater or lesser success. I'll tell you the one that I personally think has done the best job, or it was at least the first out the gate that was the best at that. But Superhero 2044, okay, if we're going to go into the history of superhero RPGs, Superhero 2044 was actually the first published superhero RPG, and that was in 1977.
Oh, wow.
Strangely enough, it didn't replicate the experience of like the 80s comic books of the time, right? Where like all the superheroes are running around Metropolis or North Little Rock, or what I say, North Little Rock, or I can't even, New York. I live in North Little Rock. There are no superheroes in North Little Rock. Trust me.
Well, just wait, because the rule of comics is that if there wasn't, there is now.
There is now, yeah, there will be. So anyway, so Superhero 2044 did this thing where it was set in 2044 and all these mutations resulting after World War III and aliens arriving and all of this stuff. So instead of tapping into the zeitgeist of comic books at the time, they, for some reason, did this thing where it was, way in the future. And it gets kind of lambasted. It gets credit as the first superhero RPG, but it doesn't really get a lot of credit for being a good game, right? But it does get, it crossed the line first. So it is credited as the first superhero RPG. But for example, the Science Fiction Encyclopedia, they said its most remarkable feature is perhaps how little influence it had on later designs.
Wow.
So, yeah, right? So now, I've never played it, right? So it could be, I might play it, and I may think it's the best game ever. But the word on the street is, it wasn't that great of a game. Or at least it was odd or confusing or something like that, okay? And, yeah, you're superheroes, but you're not really, because most people, especially in 1977, if you're thinking comic books, you're thinking Marvel, you're thinking DC, you're thinking, 4-color comics, wasn't even spandex then, just, colorful costumes running around. So I personally think it was kind of an odd choice for your first superhero game that you put out there to be set in like an apocalyptic future. But there you have it.
Yeah, well, I wonder, though, to a certain point, if, because at that point, role-playing games were really just becoming, if they figured that they couldn't go out and invent their own superhero universe, what do you want to say, imitating Marvel or DC, and because they were brand new, one, they probably didn't have the money, or neither of those companies were willing to do a licensing deal.
Yeah, it could be that, it was a world building issue, but at the same time, the designer, to give credit, because I do think it's important to give credit to the first person who got a superhero RPG to market. This is back in the 70s. D&D's been out for 3 years at this time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not like now where, there is a game out there for almost every flavor and preference, which is wonderful. We were talking before we started recording that it's wonderful that there's all these indie game designers and everything out there, and you can find just about anything to fit any niche. But this guy, Donald Saxman, and there were two editions of this, so it did merit a second edition that was published by a different publisher. But yeah, Don Saxon got this out in 77, and it's without a doubt Superhero 2044. I think the first edition was Superhero '44, and then when it was republished, it was 2044. Is the earliest example of a professionally produced superhero role-playing game. So, congrats to them for being the first. The first game that came out that tapped into the zeitgeist of the time of what people thought of as, your superhero comic books running around in the big city, and Fantastic Four versus Doctor Doom, and, the Avengers and Spider-Man and Superman and Batman, and not those characters, but tapping into that feel, was Villains and Vigilantes. And that was released in 1979 by Jeff D. and Jack Herman. Now, Jeff D. might ring some bells to some people out there. He was very involved with the art on early Dungeons & Dragons. So a lot of the art that you see in early Dungeons & Dragons is Jeff D. So he's been in the industry for a long time.
That's what I was gonna say. Looking at the art for this, it's very comic books at the time, but it's also very early Dungeons and Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Right.
AD&D, or even earlier than that.
Right. Yeah. This came out in 1979, the first edition. Now the second edition, the one that caught everybody's fancy, was in 1982. But they were the second to market, and I believe, I could be wrong, but I think Jeff D was 17. I don't know how old Jack Herman was, but they were 17 when it came out, and they actually ran into. I'm not going to go into. Yeah, I've got a couple of podcasts out there I did with Jeff D and Jack Herman where we talked about it further. But because he was young, and I'm assuming Jack Herman was too, they signed a deal with Fantasy Games Unlimited to publish it, and that deal kind of restricted them later. So they had to go through a legal process and go through some arbitration and stuff in order to publish the third edition of Villains and Vigilantes, what came out a couple of years ago, and that's now called Mighty Protectors. But it uses the Villains and Vigilantes system,
Just like real comic books.
just like real comic books. Yes, there was. Yeah, they had an ultimate crisis where they all had to band together and were able to save the universe by recreating it.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, which is a very common thing to happen in comic books. Now, Villains and Vigilantes is a lot of fun. It was actually my first RPG love. Like I mentioned before, I love Dungeons and Dragons. I played, I had Paranoia, Traveler, you name it. I played DC Heroes, played Marvel. I played Middle Earth role playing. I played GURPS. I was all over the place. I love games. And in fact, I was talking with Steve. How do y'all refer to each other internally? Like, do I want to say non-young Steve and young Steve, or I mean, how do y'all do this?
Steve and other Steve usually.
Yeah,
Steve and other Steve. Okay, so I was talking to Steve. which Steve? How do you identify yourself that we were talking before the show started?
Sometimes I think my handle on Discord is Old Steve.
Old Steve. So not young Steve, or not as young Steve.
Not as.
And I were talking before the show, and he's heard me on my podcast, and he's heard me on Boris's unofficial RPG podcast, or RPG Talk podcast. But I'm system promiscuous. That's how I identify myself. I will love to play any game once, which ties into a lot with y'all's most recent episode where you were talking about one-shots, short campaigns versus, long campaigns. I love one-shots because they give me an opportunity to check out any system once, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and yeah, maybe you don't get the full experience of a campaign, or you don't get the full experience of, watching the game progress. But I love watching the numbers and the mechanics and all that work. And I want to see how this works. And I want to try out this new mechanic and all that stuff. So I'll try anything once. But having said that, back to my original point, Villains and Vigilantes, I probably got it for Christmas of 1982 or 1983. I asked for it. Some friends were playing it. I asked for the game. I got it. And it's had a special place in my heart even today. Love Villains and Vigilantes. And it's got a lot of love for the 4-color bang pow comic book genre. What we think now, comic books are a lot more expansive than just superheroes, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of wonderful storytelling that's happening in comic books, but in this case, I'm referring to just that sort of 80s, when it was just so everywhere you went, every gas station, whatever, had a spinner rack full of superhero comic books. And that's what I'm talking about. It kind of replicates that kind of world,
Mm-hmm.
to where, you're going to be in a big, bombastic, over the top costume, and you're going to run around beating the stuffing out of supervillains.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not dark and gritty. It's not super focused on, death and stuff like that. It's just more fun than anything else. Of course, you can play any game the way you want to, but that wasn't the intent or the feel of the game. And as I mentioned, Villains and Vigilantes has actually recently published a version 3, and due to legal reasons, it's Mighty Protectors, running Villains and Vigilantes system, or something like that. And I'm actually in 2 Villains and Vigilantes games right now.
Cool.
So one of them is a play by email which worked surprisingly well because the game master is really good at making that happen. And the other one, we're just starting it up on my Discord. Not Young Steve. I don't know if you've seen the chatter in that Villains and Vigilantes channel on my Discord or not, but we've started up a Villains and Vigilantes game, which either of you or any of your listeners are welcome to join if they would like to, come kind of play a more old school kind of game. And we're doing it as a Western Marches style game.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to play like once a month. And if you miss a session, it's no problem because every adventure is self-contained, but they're in the same overarching story. So,
Cool.
if you're like me at my phase in life, time is super precious. So, and it's a bunch, it's so far it's a bunch of grognards playing the game. So we've made it specifically so you could play as little or as much as you want and still be involved. So invitations open to you or anybody out there listening. Do y'all do show notes on your?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. If you want, I'll send you an invitation to my Discord.
Okay.
That you can post there. I'll make it an open invite, that won't expire. And if anybody wants to come in and check it out, they're welcome to.
Okay. Yeah, we can put that in there.
All right. So, and Village Vigilantes is definitely a product of its time. It's very math heavy. There's lots of formulas. It's not as charty as like Rollmaster. I heard y'all talking about, the Rollmaster. I mean, though I love that. I love Rollmaster. I love MERP. I mean, my little grognard heart just warms up at that stuff. But I know not everybody does. But the thing with Village Vigilantes is the game we're playing right now, our GM, Grackle Flint, that's his handle, is very hands-on and very good to work with people. And two, it's one of those games, there's a lot of math, but once you make your character, the math's all out of the way. And you just go roll dice,
So
right?
it's all up front.
Yeah, it's all up front. It's preloaded, but there are formulas. So, and Grackle Flint, and there's a spreadsheet you can get off Drive-Thru RPG. It's like $2, and you just plug in your stuff, and it'll do all the math for you if you want. But anyway, that's my pitch for Villains and Vigilantes. It has a personal place in my heart. I love Villains and Vigilantes, because it was one of my first role-playing games, and it had kind of, for its day, I don't know how many games do it now, but at the time, the conceit was it was supposed to be you. So you would determine, or, you and your friends, everybody would sit around, would determine your statistics based on you. So it was supposed to be like Shane in real life is now suddenly a superhero, which I'm sure led to some real interesting discussions on, people's perceptions of their abilities versus others. But, and then, you rolled your powers and all that. And with Villains and Vigilantes, you can either come in with a preconceived concept for a character, or you can roll randomly. And I love to roll randomly. I love to get a whole bag of something that I have no idea what I'm going to get and then make it work, because I feel that kind of stretches my role-playing abilities. So, one of my most recent characters, the powers were so weird. Like I've got like a poison touch and like astral projection.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what? So I said, well, this is like a platypus. So I ended up naming her Patty Plus to kind of play off the platypus thing. So, but anyway, moving on in our 1,000-foot overview of role-playing games. And feel free to stop me at any time, because I'm just rattling on here. So if you guys
keep going, you're good.
I'm learning.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So moving on in our 1,000-foot overview, which again I will forget to mention some things. Please be nice in people's hate mail.
We're good on that. Don't worry about Steve's the complaint department, so he'll take care of it.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, that's spelled STEV at Me and Steve Podcast. So you've got the next big one, which came out, really, this one hit about the same time as the popular edition of Villains and Vigilantes did. And that's, of course, Champions. I'm sure you've heard of Champions. Mm-hmm. And that uses the hero system. So Champions first came out in 1981. And then they had their second edition in 1982. I think it's their second edition that kind of hit big for them. And it was the second edition of Village of Vigilantes that also hit in 1982. So a lot of people think that either Champions was first in 1981 or whatever, but no, Villains of Vigilantes was first. But then you got Champions, and I would say, even though I've read a lot about Champions, I've gotten Champions materials and read through them, I've never actually read or played Champions. But I would say, out of Villains of Vigilantes, Champions was probably more widely played. and maybe even still is, because I think they've had a continuous editions coming out, and their 6th edition is as recently as 2010 running on the Hero System 6th edition. So where Village Vigilantes kind of came out, was really popular, and then disappeared for a long time, and then just recently kind of came back the last few years. Champions has been going on the whole time. So I'd say that one probably has a stronger following. And a lot of people really like the Hero System.
Yeah, I actually saw a copy of that not too long ago at Half Price Books around here. I picked it up, kind of flipped through it, but I didn't buy it.
Everything I've read about it and heard people talk about, it's a good system. I think it's also, at least some editions of it, was fairly math heavy. You have to remember, back in the day, most games were math heavy.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, games are a lot more user friendly these days in most regards.
Mm-hmm.
But back in the day, it was assumed that you were going to have math, and that wouldn't scare people off.
Well, I mean, you figure the polyhedral dice originally were developed as math teaching tools.
This is correct. That is a good piece of trivia. Yeah, that's right. They were Gygax was ordering dice from school supply companies before they started making their own dice. That's absolutely right. And then, of course, the history, they find like D20s in Roman ruins and stuff like that. So that's always fascinating. The Platonic solids. So they're actually, they're more than just weird looking things that you roll to kill goblins. But I definitely like to roll them to kill a goblin. Anyway, okay, so we have another in our tour traipsing through the history of superhero role-playing games. There was this one's kind of weird. I had it when I was a kid and I enjoyed it. It was called Supervillains with an exclamation point in it. It was from Task Force Games, and that came out in 1982. So 1982 was a pretty big year for superhero RPGs, because editions for V&V Champions and then you had Supervillains. And this one was interesting, that you could be a superhero or a supervillain, and it played as a board game, but then it also had rules to turn it into an RPG. So
wow.
It has a special place in my heart because I liked it and I owned it and I played it. But reading reviews on it, the reviews aren't very good. The reviews are pretty poor on it. But as a kid, I enjoyed it and I had a great time playing it. And, again, I think it's interesting that because I remembered it as a board game.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went, and I was doing research and I was like, okay, so it was an RPG as well, if you wanted it to be. All right. So moving right along, here's a big one. The next two RPG games in our tour of superhero RPG history are big ones. One is, as you mentioned, not as young, Steve, is Marvel Superheroes from TSR.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a pretty big one because TSR, licensed that's a major license, right? Marvel. And they put out a game that was very easy to play and sort of aimed at, most of the reviews you read on it too, they'll point this out either as a positive or a negative. It was aimed at your average comic reader, which at the time was like 10 to 12 years old. This is in 1984. And it used a system called Phase Rip, which was like fighting ability, agility, strength, endurance. It's an acronym of your attributes. And then it had this sort of bright, friendly, multicolored chart you would roll on if you wanted to try to punch somebody or whatever you were trying to do, use your hex powers or whatever. It had a very friendly chart that you would roll on, and it was like green, yellow, and red, and very easy to read and interpret. Now, when the first edition came out, it came with pre-generated characters. You only had like 4. You could appeal like Spider-Man, The Thing, Captain America, and the Captain Marvel of the time, I think. So that was it. You had those characters, and then you had, some scenario, that came with it, and some colorful maps and stuff like that. And then in 1986, the advanced game came out, and that one it came with a lot more pre-generated characters, and you could make your own characters and that sort of thing. I can't remember. I played them both. My memory is trying to tell me that you could make your own character in the first edition from 1984, but it seems like the reviews and everything I've read since then, keeping up with it, said you couldn't. So
I had friends that played it, but I never actually got to play it.
I enjoyed it. Like I said, it was designed. It was a good introduction to role playing. If for younger kids. Mm-hmm. If you'd never played a role-playing game, then it was a good introduction to role playing, and it was a very quick, easy, accessible. I want to be the Thing, and I want to go punch Doctor Doom in the jaw kind of game. But I wouldn't say it was full of rich stories or anything like that. Now, this did get a lot of support from TSR. You had you had a ton of modules published for it. You had Dragon Magazine started devoting a section of Dragon Magazine, and so some of the stories were more substantial than others, but it was never intended to be gritty, right? It was very colorful, bang boom pow, that kind of thing, and I have fond memories of it. And in fact, there's I'm sure, are y'all familiar with HeroClix?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a phase rip. Somebody has taken the phase rip system. I played it at a convention a couple of years ago, and they've made a superhero combat game using the phase rip mechanics, and just whatever miniatures you can find.
Oh, cool.
And it's a fan project, but it's done extremely well. In fact, I've got pictures and notes I need to do a blog post that's way overdue from when I did that. And then you had a lot of Marvel games that have come out after that. TSR did another version of a Marvel superhero game. It didn't use the phase rip system. And then I think you had a Saga system.
Yeah.
Marvel game, which I've never played.
It ran on cards, I believe.
Yeah, it used cards, and I think all the Saga system games, or the Saga system games, do, if I understand correctly. Saga is not a system that I have a lot of experience with, other than reading about it or hearing people talk about it. And then Margaret Weiss, her company, did a version of a Marvel RPG, and they were like, it sold okay, but it didn't sell enough to keep the line going.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's another thing, superhero RPGs. It seems to me like it's a no-brainer. It should be a strong interest, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to be Batman or Superman or whatever, but it's never cut a huge slice, of the pie. So it's I always assume it should be more popular than it is. But I would say horror and sci-fi probably outsell superhero games in the industry, after fantasy.
I would agree with that. I know from my experience as far as superhero RPGs are concerned, it's always been sort of not necessarily something that it's not that I'm saying I wouldn't play in a superhero RPG, but that's not what I'm grabbing for initially. And that's really why we brought you on, because neither of us are experts or understand or are super versed in the systems.
Right. And that's, like I said, I'm coming from the perspective of like, I'm a major comic book geek. So to me, it was like peanut butter and chocolate. It was like, this is perfect. But anyway, and I've got a lot of other friends that are big comic book geeks. So, I know some people here in Arkansas that I think Mayfair Games acknowledged they have the longest running DC Heroes campaign known.
Oh, wow.
They went for like a long time. Yeah. Which brings us to DC Heroes. So, like that segue, darn it. It's almost like I will take no professional credit for that. It was a pure accident. So, all right. So anyway, DC Heroes was the next big one from Mayfair Games, which Mayfair Games, of course, I think of them first for DC Heroes, but other people think of them for Settlers of Catan, for being the ones that bring that over from Europe. But they came out, their first edition came out in 1985. They had another one in 1989. Then they had a third edition in 1993. And if you've ever heard of the Blood of Heroes game, that was basically, it was from Pulsar Games, and they licensed the game system from Mayfair, but it doesn't have any of the DC Comics characters or IP. So, it just uses what's called MEGS, MEGS, which is the Mayfair Exponential Game System. So, I believe I'm stealing from Wikipedia when I say this, but the Mayfair Exponential Game System is a logarithmic scale for character attributes. And, for example, a value of 3 is double a value of 2 and 4 times the value of 1, right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So by the time you get to 10 from 1, you're way exponentially more powerful. Because it keeps doubling, right? So, 5 is twice as powerful as 4, 6 is twice as powerful as 5, and it just keeps doubling and doubling and doubling. And this is the game that I teased at the beginning that I think did the best, it was the first game to really have a good, solid way of having Batman and Superman in the same fight, but still mechanically makes sense, right? Because if you let's say you're using D&D, if Batman has a strength score of 16 what should Superman's be?
Right.
Right? Like 1,000 or something like that. So they came out with this really elegant way that you do these attribute checks, and you compare, like, if Batman is trying to punch Superman, or trying to at least hit him with a batarang or whatever, then you compare, his dexterity to Superman's whatever, and then you have a chart and you roll. It's a percentile dice chart, and you see where you land there. Now, the chance of Batman actually being able to hurt Superman is very slim, but at least they're on the same scale, right? So, and when DC Heroes first came out, they did a great job with putting out, the modules and the supporting stuff and all of that. In fact, a lot of their, if you're a big comic book fan, at the time, you could learn stuff about the comic books by reading the lore, and that kind of, this is a callback. Let's go back to Star Wars West End Games. A lot of people don't realize how important that system was to the current lore of Star Wars, because you didn't have a lot of expanded universe stuff on Star Wars for a long time. But West End Games was pumping out all these source books. And so they were just writing all this stuff up. What does a Bothan look like? Well, guess who came up with that? West End Games. And so, like later in I think around Phantom Menace, or maybe even before that, I've heard anecdotally that people were like, they were bringing on writers for Star Wars stuff. And they were like, well, where's all the backstory here? And they were told to read the West End Games source books.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it does. A lot of people don't know how important, because they had to make it up.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the stuff that's in current Star Wars lore actually came directly from West End Games source books, or was strongly influenced by it. And now it's not to the same extent with DC Heroes, but I can remember buying their Watchmen source book, and it answered questions from the graphic novel, or revealed secrets that were not stated outright in the graphic novel. So what I'm saying is, if you're a fan of that era of comic books, those lore books that they put out, resource guides and adventures, are really cool stuff. Another shout out I'll give is GURPS. GURPS source books, even if you don't play the game GURPS, the lore books are amazing and can be used to enrich any game you're playing. So I can't brag enough on GURPS. Like GURPS Zombies is one of the best books I've ever read, period, on zombies and the different types. It doesn't matter if you're playing GURPS or not. Yeah. So, which brings me to my next game. How'd you like that? So I already mentioned Blood of Heroes, and Blood of Heroes, that used the Meg system, but it didn't use the DC Comics characters or IP. All right. So the next game, and then we'll just hit a couple more high notes and wrap up, because, I know you guys don't go terribly long in your show. GURPS Supers came out in 1989, had another edition in 1990, another edition in 2007. And that's a well-regarded, evidently, as far as the GURPS lines goes, that got a lot of support, and a lot of people like to play it. Another big one, in fact, if somebody right now came to me and said, what should I play? I would probably recommend this game, even though I've never played it. But it's Mutants and Masterminds from Green Ronin Publishing. And the reason I'm going to recommend it is, one, it's a variant of the D20 system, right? So, a lot of people are already familiar with the D20 system. And it's still going. It's a big system. Green Ronin is still publishing it. So as best I can tell, Mutants and Masterminds is the largest still going superhero game with the most support, right? The most widespread support. So it's your probably greatest chance of finding somebody else that plays it.
Yeah. Well, coincidentally, not to interrupt, but if I could cut in.
Yeah, sure.
Next week, we're actually going to be talking with Alexander Thomas, who has done a bunch of freelance work for them.
Well, cool. I mean, so it's a nice lead-in, nice tie-in for a follow-up episode. Yeah. Everything I read or hear on Mutants and Masterminds is very popular, and people have a lot of fun playing it. And it's that 4-color, big fun superhero action. So, that's probably, like I said, there's other games out there, and I'll run through them very quickly here in a second. But Mutants and Masterminds it looks to me like the biggie of mainstream RPG superhero games right now. I hope to try it myself someday. So, if somebody's like, well, I'd kind of like to play a superhero game, but what should I play? You might want to look into that one. It's got a lot of, it's very active. It's not a dead game by any means.
Yeah.
And it's got mutants and masterminds.
There you go.
Right? I mean, how can you not love that? Okay, I'm gonna mention some other games out there really quick just to give them some love. There's Silver Age Sentinels, which I've never played, but it is a D20 variant. I've actually got some supplements that I bought, and used RPG materials at stores. It was originally published by Guardians of Order. It's a D20 variant, but now it seems like it's published by White Wolf, and it's all over Drive-Thru. You can find all this stuff on Drive-Thru RPG, and it uses an intuitive and easy to learn D10 tri-stat system game engine. So that's the marketing copy. I don't know. So, yeah. All right. Victorious is published by Troll Lord Games. Are y'all familiar with Castles and Crusades?
Mm-hmm.
I've heard of that one.
Okay, yeah, Castles and Crusades was one of the first sort of it's sort of OSR, but it was also one of the first games to capitalize on the third edition OGL.
Mm-hmm.
So it uses the D20 system. But what's interesting about this is you're playing superheroes in Victorian London. So if you're interested, like if you thought League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was cool, whether it was the comic book or the movie or whatever, it's kind of like that. And so you're running around as a superhero of some form in Victorian London, and if it's in fiction, it's there. So you got Sherlock Holmes, you got Moriarty, all these cool things in the mix there. There's another game out there called Bash, which is Basic Action Superheroes from Basic Action Games. I've actually played that with the creator Chris Rutkowski on, I don't know if y'all remember Google Wave, but years ago Google did this thing called Google Wave, and I played a little bit with him. That was fun. You got Prowlers and Paragons from Lakeside Games. Masks, a new generation. Not as young Steve actually told me about this one. There's so many games out there, and that's a Powered by the Apocalypse where you're playing angsty teenage superheroes. Spectaculars from Scratchpad Publishing by Rodney Thompson, who was involved with the Lords of Waterdeep board game, and also was heavily involved with 5th edition. Spectaculars is cool because it's got the setup time of a board game, but you're playing an RPG.
That's neat.
So you got, yeah, he's got another game out there called Dust City Outlaws, which is you're basically doing heists.
I've heard of that one.
City. Yeah, his concept is 3 or 4 of you said, what should we do? Well, let's play an RPG. You grab the box, open it up. It's got the setup and prep time of a board game, but you're getting the experience of an RPG. So, and then this ties in to something I'll say other Steve mentioned. You mentioned Sentinel Comics RPG, which is the Sentinels of the Multiverse. That's from Greater Than Games, and that came out in 2019. And that actually spun out of a card game called Sentinels of the Multiverse. And they came up with this incredibly fun fictional comic book universe that feels like it has decades of history for the lore for their card game, and now they've come out with an RPG based on that universe.
Yeah, I had a friend who was obsessed with that card game, and he was like, you gotta run this system for me, and then never got it off the ground. So I was aware of it, and I was about to end up running a game of it. I never got the chance to get it, Again, superhero games not getting off the ground. That's...
Yeah, dun-dun-dun, wah-wah. Well, what I'll say this. I bought the digital version of the card game on Steam during a sale,
Mm-hmm.
and the lore, the fake comic book universe that they came up with it feels as rich as the Marvel universe.
It really does. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm very impressed.
I liked the card game for that reason, because it felt like, oh, this is just like, you have your big two in comics. It felt like, well, they just secretly were a third that had just been going for just as long as...
It feels like that they started in the Silver Age and are still, going today. Like the cards will have a quote on it, and it'll be like, this character from this issue of number 300 or whatever. And it's very rich. I have to give them a lot of credit. And they've got their RPG now, which I hope does well for them, because they put a lot of love into the card game. And then finally, from my list anyway, trying to keep it somewhat manageable for one episode, Monte Cook Games, they have their Cypher system, which is a settingless system, right? The Cypher system, which same thing that Numenera uses. Well, they now have Heroes of the Cypher system, and you can play big, bold, flying through the air superheroes. And what's neat about what Heroes of the Cypher system is doing, or the Cypher system, is that they also have a source book for playing a first responder.
I was going to say, that just came out, didn't it? Within the last couple months?
Very recently. Yeah, you can be a paramedic, I think you can be a police officer, that kind of thing. So I think that's really neat that there's an entire source book. A lot of RPGs will have like a sidebar or, like a paragraph about, but this actually dedicates an entire source book to if you want to be a non-superpowered hero,
Yeah, that's really cool. That's always an idea I've had for a superhero RPG, is playing a group of people who come in after the battle's over to try and assist and get everything sorted and everything together.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be interesting. I don't know if I'd want to do it as an ongoing campaign, but I think it would be interesting to just play a regular Joe in a superpowered universe.
Yeah.
You're just trying to go get some coffee, and Ultra Duper Man just crashes into, the building right next to you or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think though that's one of the things, and maybe this is part of the reason that sometimes maybe supers games don't get the love that they deserve, if you will, is because there are different, so to speak, there's so many different levels. You have your street level stuff, you have your kind of anti-heroes, and then you have your Superman, Fantastic Four, Justice League, whatever. And like you said, it's hard to balance that if everybody at the table doesn't want to play the same type of quote-unquote superhero.
Right. Yeah, no doubt.
A game that you didn't mention, and I don't know, maybe you haven't heard of it. Have you ever heard of Mutant City Blues?
I have not.
It's you might like this one. It is it's in its second edition, which written by Gareth Hanrahan and Robin D. Laws, and its premise is effectively kind of street level X-Men with NYPD Blue.
Oh, that sounds pretty fun.
You're the heightened crime investigative unit, so you have powers, but if any crime happens involving either as potential perps or the victims, people with powers, you get the case.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. That's one of those games that, again, it sounds really interesting to me as a one-shot. I don't know if I would want to play an ongoing campaign, but that sounds very fun as a one-shot, or, just 2 or 3 adventures to kind of,
Yeah, that one's put out by Pelgrane.
Okay. Oh, and I just thought of, I didn't even have this on my list. I know there is a role-playing game for the Valiant universe. So there's the Valiant comics, like Exo Man of War and Ninjak and those. I know that there's a role-playing game for that one. And that one uses a system where each scene or each adventure, the GM is supposed to change.
Oh,
so you're supposed to rotate narrators or GMs, and I'm not quite sure of the reasoning behind that, but I think I watched a little actual play of it, or read about it, and it's one of those games where it's not GM-less, but the GM is supposed to rotate.
Yeah, I was
different.
Just about to ask you if it was as weird as the Valiant comics are, because those are just always a little bit off.
Yeah, Valiant's always kind of done its own thing. I like some Valiant. I never got into them as much as the others, but it's a weird mix of 4-color Big Bang action, but also kind of realistic and gritty.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I read some Exo back in the day, and it was just weird, just odd.
Yeah, Exo is basically a caveman in the Iron Man armor.
Yep.
Is basically is where it starts anyway. I know it changes as it goes, but I like to read them every now and then, but they've never been my main comics by any means. But don't want to leave them out. They do have a role-playing game out there.
I would say I find it kind of interesting that, especially with the amount of be it film or television being done specifically with Marvel and DC right now, but even like Spawn was so big there for a while in the 90s, that there just aren't any real superhero licensed games out there right now. And it's one of those things that I wonder about every now and then, and I don't have an answer.
Yeah, it is interesting. You would think, especially with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that, with just as ridiculously popular as it was and still is, that they would have tried to come out with a game. But the more I learn about the industry, so many of these games, especially licensed games, aren't from the perspective of like whoever owns the Marvel license is like, we want to do a role-playing game. Usually it's a third party approaches and says, we want to do a role-playing game with this license. So I do know that, and they even have, hold on, my cat is snoring. Do you mind not snoring? It's the Cat Wonder, my sidekick, the Cat Wonder. Yeah, she was literally snoring over there. So, yeah, licensing and all that's a weird deal. Like, evidently they actually have expos or conventions where all of these companies come in, and then, you know, they let people come in, like, we want to make a toothbrush with your character, or we want to whatever. And then somebody would at the same time approach them and say, we want to do a role-playing game, you know, with your characters or your IP or whatever. And, you know, because I always in my mind just thought it was like Marvel Comics was like, well, darn it, we need an RPG, so we're going to go find TSR and have them do it, you know, and it rarely works that way. So it could be that the people that are interested, and I'm purely speculating here, that are interested in doing a Marvel RPG can't afford the licensing fees, or Marvel doesn't like their ideas or something like that.
Could be they just want more money than an RPG publisher's willing to give them.
This is true. Yeah, because it's, you know, we think of it as a big industry, but it's really not. In the great scheme of things, the RPG industry is pretty small potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway.
Well, I had asked for some questions on our Discord for you, and I got a couple, but some of them, there was, you know, like, do you prefer 90s Marvel or Dark Horse style stuff in your games, or, you know?
Oh, that's fine with me. Yeah, I'll throw that. I mean, I'll answer anything. So.
and the other one, there was, like I said, there was that one, and then someone wanted to know, who do you think would win in a fight between Spawn and Ghost Rider?
Okay, see, now this is where it gets fun. This is, I mean, this is the good stuff. So, and that's also one of the reasons why RPGs, comic book RPGs are fun, because you could stat them up and have them slug it out. Okay, so me personally, I like mid-80s comic books.
Mm-hmm.
I love that genre. I love the feel. I love the tone. That's my favorite era for superhero comics. So if I'm going to choose between more Dark Horse and 90s Marvel, I'm probably going to lean towards 90s Marvel as far as like an ongoing campaign, because I just like that tone. But I mean, Dark Horse was doing some super good stuff in that era. It just wasn't like a unified, you know, 4-color comic book universe, right? But they had some great characters and still do. So that's my answer there. You know, if it's a one shot, I'll play anything. You know, if it's dark and gritty, or if it's, you know, Happy Care Bears, I don't care. I'll play anything as a one shot. So Spawn versus Ghost Rider. And it's interesting that Spawn has come up a couple of times here, because Spawn's about to make a big comeback. So Todd McFarlane is pushing a Spawn shared universe, where like you have a universe of comics all in the Spawn realm, and even a sort of dark Avengers type of team full of Spawn type characters. And also there is a Spawn movie coming.
Yeah, I was gonna say, isn't he working on a new movie or TV series?
Yeah, it's a movie, and I think Jamie Foxx is on board, if I can remember. I know they've done some casting.
Yeah, I know McFarlane is always one of those guys that he can't work on anything secretly. So
right,
he's his worst. Like, he can't work on anything and keep it a secret. He's always like, by the way, I'm working on this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, he's just, yeah. And he's very, you know, well, I'll be honest, when Image Comics first came out, I thought that they were really cool art, but I thought the stories were pretty weak. But I've gone back and revisited a lot of old Image, and it's better than I give it credit for. And I'm actually rereading Spawn now, working my way through that. I'm really enjoying Spawn. But Todd McFarlane has, as a businessman and an artist, I have a lot of admiration for him. You know, he's done that action, all those amazing action figures, and, you know, the way he handles his business. Spawn is now the longest running creator-owned comic ever. Ever. It's like over 300 issues. Before that, I believe the longest one was Cerebus. But anyway, he's the big guy now, and he's still going strong. Now, Spawn versus Ghost Rider. As much as I love Spawn, Ghost Rider is going to clean Spawn's clock, because he has like Spawn is cool, but he has like limited powers, right? He has a limited amount of his power that he can get to at any time. And now it may be different now, but, you know, up through the first 50 issues or something, that's how it is. And then Ghost Rider is, did any of you ever watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yes.
I did, yes.
Okay.
At least like
Did you see?
4 seasons of it or something like that.
Yeah. Did you see the episodes where Ghost Rider showed up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Ghost Rider he totally baffled the team because his power level was so off the charts compared to like every containment thing they had, Ghost Rider could just pop out of it because he was bad to the bone. And he's sort of like, he's the spirit of vengeance that is like tapping as much of the power of Hades or hell or whatever, Mephisto's realm or whatever Marvel Comics is going to call it. And I think in most situations that Ghost Rider is gonna clean Spawn's clock, unless the only way that Spawn's gonna survive is he's smart enough that he has no problem going and breaking into like CIA munitions and coming out with like 800 guns at the same time. So he may delay Ghost Rider long enough to get away. But I think if it's power to power and Ghost Rider has a reason for taking vengeance on Spawn, that Spawn is gonna have to escape.
I think I would agree with you. I read comics periodically. I'm not a super religious reader, but I did really enjoy that 2014 Ghost Rider run where they got the newer guy and Spawn. Spawn's one of those characters that's super cunning and super smart, but he's usually put up against either demons who aren't that bright or other humans who aren't that bright.
Right. Well, yeah, and another thing I have to qualify here, like Spawn, as we know him, or at least as I know him, there's still a lot of history of him that I haven't read. He's being groomed to be like a lieutenant in the Malbolgia's army, which is basically he's being groomed to lead legions of hell.
Right.
And once he uses up all his power, he becomes, fully the Malbolgia's. And at that point, I think he might, be able to go toe to toe with Ghost Rider, no problem. And his costume is also a symbiote that mutates and gets more powerful. But Spawn as the human trying to ride herd on the bad situation he's being put in, I think Ghost Rider would drop him.
Fair enough.
And this is the fun part of comics.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and like I said, I've said before, for me, I think I'm more drawn to kind of the street level stuff, be it, like a Daredevil, Luke Cage, even, Frank Castle, or like the CW Green Arrow show. I forget, was it just called Arrow?
Yeah, just Arrow. Mm-hmm.
I like those, but for me, like the Superman, Fantastic Four, that kind of stuff, it's entertaining, like the Marvel movies, but it doesn't hook me, I guess. And so, like, if I were to ever want to play supers, I think it would be, like that Mutant City Blues sounds really interesting to me. That, or I've always said the Tick.
The Tick would actually be really hard to do as an RPG because the humor is so hard to do. You know what I mean? Like it's funny, it's super funny, but as a GM, I would feel hard to keep that level of humor up.
Oh,
right. Like how enjoyable would the Tick be if it's just a bunch of stat blocks? You've got to have that humor in there, right?
Yeah.
You would have to have the right group of people to get that to run properly.
Right. Yeah, and there's a style of humor that I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but that would be extremely hard to put a game out for unless you were just reading almost like from a script, right?
Yeah.
To capture the humor of it, because it's such a unique humor.
Yeah, the Infinity Ball and Speak.
Yeah, it'd be fun. I mean, I love the Tick. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would love to charge in and yell spoon and things go horribly wrong, but I'm oblivious because I'm a big lummox. But and Arthur's really the brains and all of that. So.
Well.
Yeah, I think with that, let's move into Game of the Week.
Game of the Week.
Game of the Week. Game of the Week.
So, who's going first this week? Shane, would you like to go first? Would you like one of us to go first?
I can go first. So I am going to throw out a game that is coming.
Okay.
But there's enough material out there, including playtest material, that I think that it's fair to call this a game of the week. Now, full disclosure, I'm on the writing team for this game.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not one of the major team members, but I am working on some writing tasks. And this is actually, I know you listen to Russ's podcast, Morris's Unofficial RPG Talk. Have you heard him talking about Level Up
Yes.
Advanced 5th Edition?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So this is what I'm going to throw out there. Just give it I think people will be very interested in this, especially if they're currently playing 5th Edition D&D. There is a game coming. It is a standalone game, but it is backwards compatible with 5e, and it's called Level Up Advanced 5th Edition. And if you go to levelup5e.com, that's levelup5e.com, there's already a ton of playtest material. Now, to sort of tease you on what Level Up is, it's 5e. It's not more complicated, but it's more complex in the options that it offers. So it offers more complexity and depth and a range of things you can do on top of what 5e already does. It also has a major emphasis on the exploration pillar, right? Because Wizards of the Coast and D&D, they're always talking about the pillars of role-playing, which are combat, role-playing, or social, and then exploration. And this gives a lot of love to the exploration pillar. And but it also does give some more combat options. It tweaks the classes a little bit. It's just really cool. But I don't want to, I've already taken up a lot of time on this podcast yapping. So I'll just say, go to levelup5e.com. There's a sign up thing where you can, put your email address in. You'll stay up to date on everything. And there are playtest materials right there that you can already start checking out with your 5e game that you're already playing. And there should be a Kickstarter, sometime in the next 6 months or so. But this is good. This is a major game, and it's going to be super, super cool. So my game of the week is Level Up Advanced 5th Edition.
And one thing I would mention too, just because he does do things a little differently, you mentioned him taking that to Kickstarter. And I'm assuming he's going to do this the way he's done all his previous Kickstarters. You might have a little more information, Shane. But when Russ Morrissey does Kickstarters, it's ready to go.
Yeah, he's ready to go. Yeah, it's the book will already be written. The Kickstarter is just how many do we print?
Yes.
And send out right now. And also, any PDF rewards go out the minute the Kickstarter ends. I've literally, his record on a Kickstarter ending, the minute the Kickstarter ends, within 6 seconds, he's already sent out all the PDF rewards.
I was going to say, I knew it was ridiculously low. But yeah.
Yeah.
He uses the Kickstarter, like you said, to really just know how many he has to print. That is the only step left.
Yeah, and of course it helps with marketing. It gets things out. But yeah, the art will be ready, the book will be laid out, everything will be written, and it will, as soon as the Kickstarter's over, it will go to press.
All right. You want to go next, Steve?
Yeah, I have one that is silly, fun, and goofy, and I stumbled across it on drive-thru, and I am going to add this to my tool bag because this is one that I want to just have just in case. It's called Bean! It is the D2 role-playing game.
So you just flip a coin every time?
Everything is either a coin or you could throw beans. They advise you could
I love it.
You could paint one side of dried beans black and just use those.
Is there a setting that comes with
yes,
this?
it is a generic fantasy setting, but it's a super simple rules light system is how they're describing it. You could use standard dice for high-low, odd or even rolls. You could toss a coin or other objects that have two distinct sides, but we recommend plain old beans. They're cheap and plentiful. Some people really enjoy customizing their own beans, and a handful of beans to keep the game moving along is quick and easy. Just something silly to be like, all right, I don't know what to like. I have my Cyberpunk game that I play in every month or so, and it's like, sit down at the table and go, I don't want to play this right now. Well, here, we're going to play Bean.
Bean. So my main question is, out of the races that are available, is one of them, can you be a human being?
I don't know. I would assume so.
Yeah. A human being. That's when I was a kid, I didn't understand being, so I thought we were human beings, like we were a form of being.
When
I was a very young kid.
According to all the art in the book, every character is a bean.
Well, that's
So
important.
that is.
There you
But
go.
like I said, just something silly came out in 2011, written and drawn by Jay Friels. Just a silly game, $3 on Drive-Thru RPG. Go check that out.
You know what would be fun is like if you could go out in a blaze of glory, like you plant yourself,
Yeah.
and then this thing pops out, and you fight, and then it like withers and dies or something like that. That would be really fun.
Oh yeah, that just sounds delightfully relaxing.
Yeah,
Yeah, it does.
it's just a nice silly game because sometimes that's all you really need in RPGs. We get so wrapped up in that serious gameplay.
Mhm.
Sometimes you just need a game
Yeah.
that's like, this is dumb. Let's have fun.
Yeah, you just want to laugh. Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
What do you got, Steve?
I think I'm going to go with something. You and I talked about it off the air a couple weeks ago. It's a fairly newer, within the last few months, title from a guy by the name of Jeff Stormer, and it is in the superhero vein. It's called Anyone Can Wear the Mask.
Oh yeah,
Nice.
And what it is it's basically it's an imaginary story which may never happen, but which then again might. It's about someone with great power and how they choose to use it. It's a tabletop RPG about a superhero, a supervillain, and the city they share. And through play, it actually runs off a standard 54 card deck of cards with the jokers in. You need 3 to 5 6-sided dice and a pen and some paper, and that's it.
yeah, and this is a 2-player.
1 to 3, it says.
Yeah, 1 to 3. See, I've heard it played with 2 players. James D'Amato on One Shots actually played that game, and yeah, that's that seems neat too. Like, just seems like a neat.
Well, I
fun
like
game.
the fact that it's focused on a smaller group.
Right.
Because, when I was getting into RPGs, a lot of times it was just me and the DM or one other person. So we did a lot of what's called duet play now.
Mhm.
It was just me and the GM. I'd play 2 or 3 characters. Maybe another guy would play 2 characters or something like that. And it was just as fun. It was just as fun. So sometimes it's hard to get a group of 4 or 5 people together. So I think that these I hear more about duet adventures being written where it's just the DM and the player, or even solo adventures. So I always like to hear about that kind of thing.
Yeah. But like I said, it's on Drive-Thru. PDF's going for like $15, so you're not talking about anything too expensive.
It's not $100 like Invisible Sun.
Yeah, well, I mean, Monty, the artwork in that is
Yeah.
just, it's so different.
Yeah, it's a very unique, cool. It's a premium experience.
Yep.
The cube, the Invisible Sun cube, is like $500
Jeez.
or something like that. Or let me look it up. I don't want to get to lying here. Maybe it was $200. Invisible Sun.
If they're charging,
It's a premium experience.
well, and look, I don't doubt with the quality of art that I saw just in the previews. I mean, he had to spend a lot of money on that product.
Oh yeah, and it's with that one you'd know it's quality, and I don't normally. I'm not the person to be like, oh well, it's quality because it's so and so, but it's Monty Cook. You know it's quality. I don't think he might have, but I don't think Monty Cook's ever put out a bad game. You know what like.
Right. No, it's that there's a certain level of quality and experience
Yeah.
that you're going to get. Yeah, so the cube was about $250. And that's Invisible Sun in with all the material components. But it's designed so it has everything you need for a group of people to play. You don't have to go out and buy a whole lot of other books, and everybody has to buy a player's handbook. And no, it's really, they kind of positioned it when it first came out as like groups would pitch in, and buy this to play instead of just like the GM having to buy everything.
Yeah, if I ever strike it big, I'll be running a Rolex and Invisible Sun game where your Rolex will play some Invisible Sun. But
yeah, your Grey Poupon and
Yeah,
your Rolex
yeah.
will play Invisible Sun with you. Yeah.
just everything. If it's expensive, yeah, bring that. Yep.
Yep. Caviar. The snacks on the table will be caviar.
Yeah,
and,
caviar and
like dips and
Truffles
chips.
and yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
But
The dice are made out of diamonds.
I had these cuts. Anyways, with that, I think we've come to the end of our episode, and we want to thank you for coming on, Shane. It was really awesome to have you on and have that little history lesson about superhero RPGs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for having me on, and you guys y'all can come jump on Shane Plays Geek Talk sometime, and we'll chew the fat if you want. But really enjoyed it, so thanks for the offer.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to look at? You have the podcast, obviously. Anything else you want to plug of your stuff?
Not really. Just Shane Plays Geek Talk, and I cover a lot of geek stuff. I mean, role playing games and games are a huge part of what I do. It's not the only thing, but yeah, role playing games, comic books, video games. We were talking before the show recorded that I'm the co-author with Matt Barton on Dungeons and Desktops, the history of computer role playing games, Volume 2. So if anybody's interested in that, I have several podcast episodes that talk about computer role playing games. But yeah, if it's geeky, come if you like geeky stuff, come check it out.
Yeah. I would say you did a couple really kind of cool episodes I've heard on film and stuff too. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I cover a lot of stuff. I just follow my nose and have fun.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
I guess with that, anybody out there listening, if you want to get a hold of us, we've got the email address, we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, we've got a Discord server. All the links are in the show notes because I don't remember how to properly say them all in syntax.
Yeah, and with that, we want to remind everyone to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Woohoo!
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you, and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.